For years, the question hung over the monarchy like unfinished business. Could Harry and Meghan ever return to the roles they once held? Private appeals, public accusations, fractured trust, and endless speculation had kept the possibility alive. Now King Charles has answered it. There will be no simple restoration of their former royal life, no quiet return to the positions they occupied, no reset behind palace doors. The king has drawn a clear line, and this time he intends it to hold. A working senior royal is someone who carries out official duties on behalf of the sovereign, represents the monarchy publicly, and operates under palace rules. Charles has confirmed that the Sussexes will not regain those roles. Family contact can continue. Their institutional place cannot. The decision protects the crown from further uncertainty, yet it forces a father to accept that love alone cannot erase consequence. Charles read the final briefing twice. The document was never only about two public figures. It was about his younger son, a man he still loved despite years of distance and mistrust. Reopening official negotiations would have revived every old argument about loyalty, confidentiality, public criticism, and who spoke for the crown. Ending the uncertainty protected the institution. It also meant accepting that the old arrangement was finished. Harry received the ruling privately and said nothing at first. Meghan watched his expression change as the truth settled. This was not another temporary pause. Royal duty had never been merely a job to him. It was bound up with identity, family, and belonging. A personal relationship with his father might survive. Reconciliation would no longer serve as a hidden route back into official royal life. Charles made the separation plain. The family could rebuild personal trust. The palace would not keep reopening negotiations over status. Harry could still be a son. Meghan could remain part of the wider family. Neither would simply step back into the roles they once held. That ruling did not appear from nowhere. One private encounter had already convinced Charles that another attempted reset risked a deeper crisis. Behind the formal language sat a simpler wound, a father and son who no longer agreed on what reconciliation was supposed to mean. Charles saw a distinction between loving Harry and restoring his royal position. Harry experienced that distinction as artificial and painful. Meghan understood that any return under tighter conditions would mean surrendering the independence they had fought to build. Between those three perspectives stood William, already carrying the consequences that might one day become his responsibility. Charles felt the decision as a father, even while knowing it would be judged as a royal ruling. He told a trusted aide he did not want Harry to mistake the refusal of a royal role for rejection as a son. The words revealed everything. The monarch could close an official door and still hope the family relationship survived. He also knew Harry might not experience those two things separately. For the younger son, status and belonging had been tangled together for most of his life. Removing one could easily feel like losing both. After receiving the message, Harry reached for his phone, then stopped. What hurt most was not the loss of ceremony. It was the realization that the palace now considered the old version of his life finished. Meghan asked the harder question: even if they were allowed back, could they truly live again under stricter limits on public statements, commercial work, and access to private royal discussions? William carried a different weight. In a restrained conversation with his father, he warned that bringing Harry back without rebuilding trust would not heal the conflict. It would simply move the same conflict inside the monarchy again. One day William could inherit responsibility for the institution. Any unresolved arrangement created now could become his problem later. The warning stayed with Charles because it turned a family argument into a question about the next reign. Meghan wanted independence without humiliation. Harry wanted belonging without permanent suspicion. William wanted stability without pretending the damage had vanished. Charles wanted all three at once, even as he began to understand they might be impossible to combine. The real point of no return was not a television interview, a memoir, or a headline. It was one private meeting at Windsor intended to test whether a limited path back could still exist. There were no cameras and no public statements, only family members trying to define trust after years of damage. Charles had authorized the meeting because he still wanted to know whether some form of royal service could be rebuilt without reopening every old wound. Harry might take on selected duties while keeping much of his independent life, but any arrangement would need strict boundaries. William entered cautiously, believing confidential family conversations, public criticism, commercial partnerships, and future expectations could not remain blurred. Harry felt the conditions closing around him almost at once. A return based on restrictions, he argued, would leave him physically inside the family while permanently treated as someone who could not be trusted. He asked why reconciliation should begin with him proving his loyalty before the family proved theirs. Then he asked whether the monarchy had ever truly protected him when pressure became unbearable. Charles answered that protection and agreement were not always the same thing. Harry then made the request that changed everything. He wanted written assurance that another future disagreement could never result in his sudden removal from duties. William objected immediately. No individual royal could demand immunity from the sovereign's authority. Harry pushed back. He could not return to a system where his place could vanish the moment another conflict erupted. The tension broke. Harry asked whether he was being invited home or merely being managed. He left before the king gave him the answer he wanted. Charles remained with William, shaken. They were no longer negotiating duties. They were negotiating two completely different meanings of trust. Harry wanted security before returning. William believed trust had to come before security. Forcing those positions together could damage everyone. When father and son faced each other again, there were no advisors and no briefing papers. Harry wanted the answer directly. Charles knew avoiding it would only deepen the wound. What followed was not a shouting match, but something more painful, a conversation between two men who still loved each other and had reached opposite conclusions about what that love could repair. Harry asked whether years away had erased any chance of serving meaningfully again. Charles listened and answered carefully. Harry would always be his son, but affection could not rebuild an official role while trust, responsibility, and competing public identities remained unresolved. When Harry asked whether William had pushed for that answer, Charles refused to place the decision on his elder son. The responsibility belonged to the sovereign alone. Blaming William would have turned a father-son dispute into another battle between brothers. He would not allow that escape route. Then Charles delivered the sentence his son had feared. The palace would not keep reopening negotiations about restoring Harry and Meghan as senior working royals. The decision could hurt them both, but years of uncertainty had already hurt the family more. Harry said nothing for several seconds. The anger remained, yet beneath it sat something heavier, the realization that this was no longer a negotiation. Charles had chosen clarity over hope, and the choice cut deeply because it came from a father who still insisted he loved him. That admission revealed the deeper truth. Charles was not deciding only what kind of father he wanted to be. He was deciding what kind of monarchy William would inherit. Allowing Harry and Meghan to return without a completely new framework risked creating two competing centers of royal influence, one inside palace discipline and another partly outside it. The sovereign decides who formally represents the monarchy. Return to working status would reconnect Harry to the institution itself, even while he and Meghan maintained an independent public and commercial identity. William chose his words carefully. He did not want the decision to look like one brother forcing another out. He also warned that he could not inherit a system in which royal roles shifted according to personal tension or private reconciliation. Harry's future could not depend on whether two brothers were getting along that year. Charles absorbed the warning in silence. If he delayed the decision, he would not remove the conflict. He would simply hand it to William later. He would not leave the same unresolved problem for the next reign. Private reconciliation could change with time. Official royal status could not remain permanently open to negotiation. Meghan's position sharpened the choice further. Any renewed role would require tighter limits around public statements, commercial activity, and internal royal access. She and Harry had already built a life around greater independence. Returning officially would mean giving part of that freedom back. No arrangement could offer everyone everything. The crown needed clarity. William needed stability. Harry wanted belonging. Meghan wanted autonomy. One of those needs had to give way. For Harry, the reality settled when discussions once described as possibilities simply disappeared. There was no phased return, no restored working schedule, no pathway back to the position he once occupied beside William. He and Meghan remained non-working members of the royal family, still part of the wider family, but no longer carrying out official duties on behalf of the sovereign. private invitations can still happen without changing their status. A family gathering or personal visit will no longer be treated as evidence that Harry is moving back toward official service. For years, every warmer conversation with Charles had left room for hope that personal reconciliation might reopen professional doors. That hope is gone. Even if father and son rebuild trust, even if old anger softens, the official answer will remain the same. Meghan saw the danger from another angle. Chasing a version of royal life that no longer exists could keep them emotionally trapped between two worlds. Freedom means little if their future is still controlled by whether the institution changes its mind. Harry reread the message summarizing the arrangement and locked his phone. Nothing in it said he could not come back as a son. Meghan told him that perhaps this was the distinction he had resisted accepting all along. Charles had deliberately removed ambiguity, but he had not erased family contact. The decision also protects William from inheriting the same unresolved battle. Later, Charles and Harry spoke privately again. This time neither argued over titles, duties, or conditions. They confronted the relationship beneath all of it. Harry stopped asking whether he could return to his old position. Charles stopped answering solely as sovereign long enough to speak simply as his father. Harry admitted he had treated restoration of his royal role as proof that the family still wanted him. Without that possibility, he feared he had lost belonging itself. Charles answered slowly. Love and office were never the same thing in his mind. He could not return the former role without reopening the same problems over trust and divided identities. But he also refused to accept permanent distance from his younger son or grandchildren as the price of protecting the monarchy. One decision did not have to destroy the other relationship. Harry finally stopped fighting the ruling. He asked whether they could speak again without every conversation becoming a negotiation. Charles agreed. Neither demanded surrender from the other. Harry did not ask for the decision to be reversed. His father did not demand that every old grievance disappear first. For the first time, the closed royal door did not feel like the end of every road between them. When the decision reached the public, nuance vanished. To some, Charles had finally protected the monarchy. To others, a father had institutionalized the distance between himself and his younger son. Palace messaging tried to separate private family contact from official royal service. Affection, invitations, and official status were no longer connected automatically. Headlines declared no royal return. Broadcasters described the definitive end of the Sussexes' former working chapter. Harry told Meghan the coverage made it sound as though his father had closed every door. She reminded him that the private conversation had said something different. Charles ended negotiations over royal duty, not the possibility of rebuilding family contact. Charles refused to weaken the language simply to soften criticism. Vague wording would recreate the uncertainty he had worked to end. William kept his response restrained. This was a structural settlement, not a personal triumph. Harry remains wounded. Charles remains saddened. Meghan remains cautious. Yet the rules are finally clear. In the end, the decision is neither the triumphant return Harry once imagined, nor the total family severance many feared. It is something harsher and perhaps more sustainable. The old royal arrangement is over. Harry and Meghan will not return as senior working royals. That chapter has been closed deliberately and permanently. But Charles has refused to make institutional separation synonymous with personal abandonment. A family visit will no longer be mistaken for a comeback. A warmer conversation will no longer reopen negotiations about status. Harry slowly accepts the difference. Returning to Britain or seeing his father no longer has to mean reclaiming the life he once had beside William. Meghan reaches the same conclusion from another direction. The ruling frees them from endless bargaining over partial restoration. William receives clarity of his own. He will not inherit a monarchy still avoiding one of its most divisive questions. Charles closes the final folder. Elsewhere, Harry puts the message away instead of reading it again. Neither man has won, neither has received everything he wanted. For the first time, both understand exactly where they stand. The royal door Harry and Meghan once walked through will not reopen. The family door was never formally locked. Charles chose responsibility over the comforting illusion that every broken relationship can be repaired simply by restoring the past. Harry remains his son. Meghan remains part of the wider family. William's future is clearer. The crown moves forward without unfinished negotiations hanging over it. The old chapter ends here, not in triumph or revenge, but in painful clarity. The monarchy moves forward, and the family must now learn to love one another without pretending the past can be restored.